Miami is a big market, but it's a low revenue market, and the way to change that,
In terms of television and rights and all that.
yes, but it's more than that. It's tickets and signage and in-stadium revenues. The way to change that is to hopefully have a new ballpark, and in Miami we need a ballpark with a roof, and we're talking about that now, and hopefully eventually that will happen, and that will create a whole new new possibilities for us to be able to increase the payroll and continue to have a team that not only competes but that also contends.
The Florida Marlins are world champions. Yeah, they just beat the Yankees in Yankee Stadium to win their second title in 6 years. I don't know how the hell they were able to do it, considering after the first one they blew the whole team up, but I guess luck just favors the teams down south. However, with the absolute money hog that is Jeffrey Loria sitting as the owner, we all knew it was only a matter of time before shit started to go down. And sure enough, right after that run, they let go of Derek Lee, Uguer Urbina, and Ivan Rodriguez. However, the 2004 Marlins weren't bad by any means. In fact, they achieved something unprecedented for this club. 2 winning seasons in a row! Never mind the fact that they were only 4 games over 500. It still counts! Lowell and Cabrera both got to enjoy lucrative seasons, as they were both All-Stars. And the pitching was highlighted by Carl Pavano, going 18-8, and Armando Benitez throwing 47 saves, breaking Alfonseca's record from a few years prior. However, they missed the playoffs. Once again, the prospect of multiple runs in a row had eluded them, but they still had hopes to remain competitive. Well, remember Pavano and Benitez from like 2 sentences ago? Yeah, they're gone. But in their place, they would sign Carlos Delgado to the biggest contract in franchise history at the time. He was a man who would hopefully lead the Marlins back to prosperity, but of course they would flounder, as by the All-Star break they sat at 44-42, 7 games out of first. While Lowell had regressed, Willis would go on to throw his best season, finishing the year with a 2.63 ERA that got him second in Cy Young voting. Todd Jones would also fit in greatly as the team's closer, throwing 40 saves with a 2.10 ERA. It wasn't enough to carry the team, however, as by the end of July they were still barely treading water. Despite expectations, the Marlins practically did nothing at the deadline, as they hoped to ride what they had into October. And sure enough, they had a good August, going 17-14, and heading into September they were right in the thick of the wildcard hunt, holding the lead on the 13th over a slew of other teams. But of course, at the worst possible time, they imploded, losing 12 of their next 14. A sweep against the Braves wasn't enough, as for the second straight year, they finished at 83-79 and missed the playoffs. Meanwhile, the damn Padres went 82-80 and won their division? What the hell? It was an uncertain time in Miami, as their roster had been built seemingly to be good, but not good enough to get back to the postseason. That can be attributed to a number of things: underperforming seasons, missed potentials, questionable deals, whatever. The point is, the Marlins were stuck in a state of limbo. So, what do you do about it? Well, if your name is Jeffrey Loria, then you already know the answer. You remember how he whined to Montreal about getting a new park since Olympic Stadium was old and antiquated? Well, here we are in 2005, and Pro Player Stadium is old and antiquated, and they're tired of sharing it with the Dolphins. So, is it any surprise what happens next? In 1997, the Marlins won it all and then immediately sold everything. Such a big fire sale like that has to be crushing for a fan base. Well, how about another one? AJ Burnett, Todd Jones, Mike Mordecai, Jeff Conine, Mike Lowell, Carlos Delgado, Paul Loduca, and more were all gone. Jack McKeon, the man who led this team back up to the top, retired. Josh Beckett, the man who shut down the Cubs and Yankees, the #1 prize from the '97 blow-up, traded to Boston. It was happening again. The Marlins were blowing it all up again. We all know why. Loria wanted a new stadium, and the city wasn't giving it to him. So he basically threw a hissy fit and sold everybody under the guise of a market correction. By the end of it all, the Marlins payroll sat at only $21 million in 2006. In contrast, Alex Rodriguez was making more than the entire team. They started 6 rookies on opening day, and predictably enough, they started 11-31. Fucking hell. This really is history repeating itself. How can this happen to a team not once, but twice? Well, actually, the 2006 Marlins weren't all that bad, as they were somehow able to rebound from that terrible start, getting all the way up to 73-72 in September before finishing at 78-84. Not absolutely terrible. That's a nice surprise. Cabrera and Willis, the only guys they kept, were obviously leading the way, but there were also a lot of notable performances from unlikely faces. Dan Uggla, the replacement for Castillo, would have a surprisingly good year, being selected for the All-Star game despite being a Rule 5 pick. Hanley Ramirez, acquired from Boston, would win NL Rookie of the Year, and their new coach, Joe Girardi, would win Manager of the Year. Their new rotation had 4 rookies: Hannibal Sanchez, Josh Johnson, Scott Olson, and Ricky Nolasco, all win 10 games. The first time that's ever happened. However, it wasn't enough to get people to care, as attendance had finally hit rock bottom. Ever since the '97 sale, the Marlins had been ranking near the bottom of the league, but the '05 sale was the final nail in the coffin, as 2006 would start an 18-year run where the Marlins were dead last in the NL every single year except one, going all the way up to present day. Their unwillingness to keep anyone around had stifled fan interest, and even when they did find success, they often squandered it. Right after the season ended, Girardi was fired, which you'd think would be insane since he just won Manager of the Year, right? Well, he did the one thing that you could never do. He broke the one cardinal rule of Marlins baseball, and that is never, ever stand against the almighty Loria. They never really liked each other, with the most notable incident coming in a game against the Dodgers, where Girardi decided not to challenge a strike call, even though Loria, who was in the stands and mere feet away from the dugout, vehemently opposed it. We can never allow his ego to be hurt, so of course it was the right move to shoot him out of a cannon. Loria shall rule this team with an iron fist. However, this 2006 team was better than we all thought, so you know what that means. It's time for false hope. The '07 Marlins were eager to get back to where they once were, but instead they decided to imitate the 2022 Rays and have the entire team die. The rotation was basically destroyed, as Johnson had to get Tommy John, Sanchez had to get shoulder surgery, Nolasco had a sore elbow, and Willis regressed hard. In just 1 year, they went from the 5th best ERA in the league to the 2nd worst, and they gave up the most runs in an ugly campaign. At least the offense was still good, as they set franchise records in runs, hits, and RBIs. But it was the end of an era in Miami, as by season's end, Cabrera and Willis would both be sent to Detroit. The next few years can be summarized as the Marlins putting out a bunch of nobodies while Loria continued to get a new park built. 2008 saw them post a winning record again, and they had a decent chance to make the playoffs in September with a 9-game winning streak, before they lost 4 in a row to end their chances. They were never able to get over the hump, and payroll continued to be low, with Ugla leaving in 2010 for the Braves of all teams. In 2011, they had a great start, going 30-20, before falling off a cliff in June, going 5-23, straight down to the basement. They had some new guys to give some hope, like Giancarlo Stanton, Javier Vasquez, and pickups like Josh Reyes, Heath Bell, and Mark Burley in the 2011 offseason. And there was good news on the horizon, as in 2009, the team announced they had finally agreed to plans for a new stadium, built on the site of the old Orange Bowl, and set to open in 2012. But with the league's lowest payroll for 4 years now, something seemed to be off. Hell, even MLB had to step in and tell Loria to spend more, as in 2010 an agreement was made to increase payroll in accordance to how much money they got from revenue sharing. And of course, the truth was that Loria had made $33 million in 2008 and 2009, and got $92 million from revenue sharing. He had propagated this image to the public that he had no money, and he managed to rush the voting in such a way that he had the county by the balls. And thus, they were already having money troubles even as construction was underway. The result? A bad stadium deal in a bad location, with the large majority of it being covered by public bonds. The new stadium was supposed to usher in a new age of Marlins baseball, but instead, it became the ignition for this team's nosedive into irrelevance. When Marlins Park opened its doors on April 4th, 2012, there was hope that it would be the beginning of a new age. But of course, if you know Jeffrey Loria, that was far from the truth. The warning signs were there when he couldn't even be bothered to give his new signings no trade clauses. But new uniforms and logos couldn't save this team from being terrible, as they debuted their new look by being one of the worst teams in the league. And so, at season's end, Loria betrayed the fans and the entire city by trading away everyone again, as Sanchez, Ramirez, Reyes, Johnson, and Burley were all gone. He had the city of Miami fooled once again, and any hopes that he would try to build a competitive team were destroyed once and for all. I mean, he got his shiny new stadium, so why should he care now? The shrine to Jeffrey Loria now stood as a gigantic money pit for the poor people of Miami, and they're stuck with it for a long time. Attendance cratered, as after the initial excitement wore off, they went right back to being at the bottom. They were only able to sell out twice in the stadium's first year, and ever since, it's been a sad sight to see. Just 1 year later, the players would walk out to the field and be met with mostly empty stands. And for good reason, because what do these fans have to see? Why should they bother coming out to the ballpark? The new stadium was christened with 8 losing seasons in a row, including 2 100-loss campaigns. But there were attempts, desperate tries to get people to come to the games. Look! We signed Old Man Ichiro! Of course, there were still good players shining through all the trash. as Jose Fernandez would win the 2013 Rookie of the Year. Marcell Ozuna would begin to make his name known, and Henderson Alvarez would throw the Marlins' 5th no-hitter. Christian Yelich would also make his debut during this time, and grow into a solid force in the outfield. In a rare sight, Stanton would be given the biggest contract in MLB history at the time, with a monstrous 13-year, $325 million deal in 2014, which only bumped the team up from being shit to being mid. It was a tough time in Miami, and it would be made worse as tragedy would strike the team in 2016, as Jose Fernandez would be killed in a boating crash. The next day, the team would pay tribute to him, as they would win against the Mets. D. Strange Gordon would lead the team off with a homer, and as he rounded the bases, he couldn't contain his emotions anymore, and would break down crying. What did this poor team do to deserve this fate? Had they angered the baseball gods for their crazy runs? Was this their punishment? Years upon years of futility with a terrible owner in an empty stadium? This team had everything, and just as quickly, they had nothing. It's now been 15 years since the Marlins defeated the Yankees to win their 2nd title, and they haven't even been back to the playoffs since then. With all the pain they've had to endure, surely enough is enough, right? I don't know if this team can take any more. Well, finally, after nearly 20 years of hell, Loria was ready to sell, and Miami was freed from one of the worst owners in baseball history. The fact that this man was not only able to destroy the Expos, but also immediately turn around and destroy the Marlins as well, is astounding, and should be put up on record as a lesson to never let fuckers like him get what they want. The Marlins could have been so much more without the influence of this greedy bastard. And now we're only left to wonder what could have been. But look at me, talking like the sale was the turning point for this team. Of course it wasn't. This is the Miami Marlins, where nothing good can ever happen to them. Just as they got rid of the cancer on top, they replaced it with another dubious choice. Bruce Sherman would purchase the team for $1.2 billion, allowing Loria to, of course, bail out with a golden parachute. And his partner would be a stark reminder of that day when the Marlins stood atop the baseball world. When Josh Beckett took the mound for Game 6 in Yankee Stadium, he had to face the ever-deadly Yankee lineup, including Jason Giambi, Jorge Posada, Bernie Williams, Kareem Garcia, and of course, the captain, Derek Jeter. He would be held hitless that night, as he went 0 for 4 with 2 strikeouts. But he would not forget that night, as now, 15 years later, he's back to pretend that he can run a baseball team. Fucking Derek Jeter is a co-owner of a professional baseball team. Who let this guy in the office? Of course, in their hubris, thinking they can right the ship, they immediately followed the time-honored Marlins tradition and sold everyone again! For fuck's sake, this is the 4th major fire sale in only 20 years! How can you be this incompetent? The new regime even went as far as to unveil a full rebrand, which tried to distract people from the fact that they just traded Ozuna, D. Gordon, and Yelich, and even fucking Stanton. They gave this guy a 13-year deal and only kept him for 4, and they traded him to the fucking Yankees of all teams. Why even bother getting mad at this point? This is how the Marlins have been for the past 20 years. They've fallen so far now, they've gotten used to the smell of rock bottom. All that's left is to keep wading through this shit and see what happens. Once again, the Marlins debuted their new colors with a terrible season, going 57-105 in 2019, their worst season since '98. It's now been 26 years of existence for this club, and they've had a winning record for a whopping 6 of them. And that number will only increase to 8-31 in the years to follow. But hey, that means they've had 2 winning seasons in the past 5 years. That's a good thing, right? Well, in 2020, with the shortened year, the Marlins were once again dead even at 31-29. In any other year, they would have been forgotten, but they actually qualified for the playoffs due to the expanded bracket. And so, for the first time since 2003, the Miami Marlins were playing October baseball. Funnily enough, it was against the Chicago Cubs, the same team they came back from down 3-1 to complete the improbable comeback in the NLCS all those years ago. Almost 2 decades later, a lot has changed. The Cubs finally broke through in 2016, winning their first title in 108 years, as they enjoyed prosperous times in the 2010s. Even now, as that core is starting to age, they're still a good team, and can definitely make some noise. Well, even after all this time, the Marlins' postseason magic still remained, as they put on a miraculous performance, shutting down the Cubs to sweep the wild card 2-0. It was thanks in part to their new star pitcher, Sandy Alcantara, who shut down Chicago in Game 1. With that, their perfect record of playoff series had improved to 7-0. But that funny little stat would finally come to an end, as they would be demolished by the Braves. And so they entered the 2020s with cautious optimism, as Alcantara would continue to become elite, winning the Cy Young in 2022. They would make history by signing Kim Eng as GM, becoming the first woman to hold an executive position in MLB. They would pick up Luis Arias, who would go on to hit .354 in 2023, and along with Jesus Sanchez, Jazz Chisholm, and Tanner Scott, they posted a winning record in a full season for the first time since 2009. Despite still only being 3rd in the division, they were able to snag a wildcard spot due to the addition of a 3rd wildcard team. And it looked to be that things were finally turning around for this team. But of course, they would fall flat again, as they would be swept in the wildcard round against the Phillies. Even despite 2 playoff appearances, Marlins Park has still yet to host a playoff game, as in 2020 they were in a neutral site, and in 23 both games are on the road. The closest this city has ever come to having meaningful baseball in Marlins Park has been the 2023 World Baseball Classic, where the stadium was packed to watch the best players from around the world play. Going from the crazy energetic crowd watching the final match between USA and Japan to Marlins opening day is like polar opposites. People in Miami care about baseball. They just don't give a single shit about the Marlins. And so, where are we now? As we wander the wasteland that was once the Miami Marlins franchise, I gotta ask, was it worth it? They've already dealt away Arias and Chisholm. Alcantara had to get Tommy John, and Eng is out after only 3 years. Good for her. She deserves better than this sad excuse for a team. In 2024, they're once again in the basement. I don't even have to wait until the end of the season to know that they'll be at the bottom, because, for fuck's sake, we already know how this team is. Jeter would step down as CEO in 2022, and once again the Marlins seem to be adrift in the baseball landscape. There really seems to be no winning for these guys. They've been dealt shit hand after shit hand for years now. And now they're in the most unenviable of spots: apathy. The Marlins are the biggest afterthought in Major League Baseball. A bad team playing in a bad stadium in front of empty seats where nobody seems to give a shit. It makes the fact that they were once great something of a pipe dream. The fact that this team was able to win not one, but 2 championships back in the day is mind-boggling. It's like looking into an alternate universe where the Marlins turned out to be a well-respected franchise with lots of success and fame. It makes those runs all the more special, because at the end of the day, no matter what happens, Marlins fans can still hold on to 1997 and 2003. And really, I feel bad the most for the fans. The people who grew up with this team and had to watch as ownership would tear it down again and again. Watch as they built a new ballpark only to deface it with terrible baseball. They didn't deserve any of this, but it's what they were stuck with. When Jeter and Sherman blew up the team in 2018, fans were literally crying at the podium in a town hall, asking why they couldn't have got anybody else to make the team better. When told they would have to trust in prospects they've never even heard of course nobody bought it. Why would they? The past decade told them to ignore ownership's lies. And sure enough, 6 years after that claim, the Marlins are barely better off than they were before. It's just not fair. It's never been fair. But I guess that's the fate of the Miami Marlins, doomed to fade away into baseball obscurity forever. Okay, that's a real downer note to end the video on. Let's talk about something positive here. The greatest thing the Marlins franchise has brought us in the last 20 years. The one, the only, Marlins man! Lawrence Levy is just a guy. An average dude who happened to like watching games. In 2012, he would rise to prominence as he would be seen in various sporting events wearing his bright orange jersey and visor. He would be spotted in multiple Super Bowls, World Series games, NBA Finals, and even the Kentucky Derby. He's grown so popular that he was able to make his own brand out of it, and was even able to use it for good as he donated profits from his merch sales to Make-A-Wish in 2014. Of course, in 2018, after Jeter blew the team up, he was vehemently not happy about it. And ever since then, he's been distancing himself from the team. He still hangs around games wearing that same jersey even today. But in his eyes, the team he grew up watching has turned his back on him. he had wanted to offer Diamond Club seats at a cheaper rate than what the team wanted, citing the lack of stars the team had for why. And when they disagreed, he announced he would no longer attend Marlins home games. Even when they finally made the playoffs and people could watch, he was not in Philadelphia, but instead Milwaukee to watch the Brewers and Diamondbacks. As expected, the team ruined any goodwill they had with him, just like with anybody else. But even still, Marlins man remains, just sitting there, watching, always present and never changing. He is the embodiment of this team, as while they're always the butt of jokes for decades now, that bright orange jersey is a reminder that they indeed exist, and they were once something great. Marlins Man is a testament to how we should honor this team, as even though they had greatness taken away from them, even though they've seen everything destroyed before their very eyes again and again, and even though they've become absolutely unrecognizable compared to the glory days, they still deserve to be remembered.